You are now listening to the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Welcome to They Live by Film, a podcast dedicated to bringing you film discussion and interviews from around the world. I am Adam Lundy, and I am joined by my co-host Chris Haskell. Hello, Chris.
Hello, how are you?
Hello. I'm great. I'm still trying to find Zach. Zach, where are you?
I think he's sucked up into an alternate reality through the Necronomicon.
Oh, that's understandable. No, Zach has some family stuff. He's not going to be on this episode. Hopefully he'll be back next time out. But he couldn't make it on, unfortunately. But we're all thinking of Zach. And I know he's super bummed to not get to talk about Evil Dead because I'm pretty sure it was he decided that we were going to talk about these movies. I'm pretty sure it was his idea.
But does Zach even like horror movies?
Some say yes, some say no. I don't
I know.
think we've ever gotten official confirmation from the man himself.
Wasn't it? Didn't he have 100 that he saw last year? I mean, like from 2023 or something crazy like that.
I wouldn't be surprised.
He had some outstanding or astounding statistic about how many horror movies he saw last year.
Let me see. I have Letterboxd in front of me. I'm sure he probably has a list where he
Yeah,
specifically
maybe
ranked
it was
horror
50, but it was some
films.
number. I was just like, how?
Let me see. Let me find Zach on Letterboxd. Where are you, Zach?
While you're searching, I'm gonna look. I have been. Everybody likes to do these lists for spooky season, like October watch list kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I just can't commit to that. But it's funny because it kind of happens where if I was to follow one of those lists, I'm probably checking off a lot of boxes just naturally. Because every label that I'm, recording for or watching for is horror movies basically right now, right? So I'm getting to see a lot of stuff anyways that I should probably look at one of those lists and see how close I'm getting. Because I'm watching a movie a day and I'm sure it kind of fits within all these different categories.
Yeah, see what I used to like make a set list. So I used to sit down at the end of September and make like a list of 31 films I'm going to watch. But then I always ended up steering off course.
Hmm.
So what I've done this year instead is I wrote down like 10 that I wanted to watch,
Yeah.
and then anything that I've just watched because I wanted to watch it, I've just added it in as I've watched it, if that makes
Oh, okay.
sense.
Made
So
it seem like it was always part of the plan.
yeah, like I've made 10 that I know I want to watch, but at
Uh-huh.
least I'm not, at least if I, like for example, like I never planned on watching a ton of Giallo movies, but I've been watching a ton of Giallo movies because I watched one and then I've just been kind of working my way through the set that's on the Criterion channel. So
Okay.
I like to have the availability to freewheel a little bit.
I think it's
Um, Zach's list for ranked of 2023 horror only includes 44 films, so I think he's slacking a little bit in the fact that he only watched 44 horror films that were released in 2023.
that's insane.
Um, 2024, he's already up to 41 films in 2024, 20 horror films this year. So
It's a
uh,
good year for her.
he's definitely gonna beat it.
That's so crazy. Well done, Zach.
Well done, Zach. Yeah, in terms of like what I've been watching myself recently, apart from Radiant stuff and what we're going to talk about today, as I said, I've been watching a few Giallos that are on the Criterion channel. Watch Don't Touch Your Duckling, All the Colors of the Dark, Death Walks at Midnight, and Torso. So seeing those five, because I'd already seen a couple of them that are
Can,
included.
can I take a guess at which one you like the best?
Sure,
Depending on the mood you're in, I guess when you watched it, but I have a hunch that you would really like Death Walks at Midnight.
I did. Yeah, that was probably my favorite one. But it
Okay.
was it was the most classically Giallo
Yeah.
out of all of them. Actually, it was the one that's like the most quintessentially Giallo, just person witnesses a murder that they can't quite explain and have to try and figure out the clues to put it all together. It's your pretty bog standard Giallo, but it was good. Don't Touch Your Duckling was good as well. I enjoyed that also. That'd be a very close second. All the Colors of the Dark, you know. it looked cool and stuff, but I barely knew what was happening at any one point in the film.
Yep.
Um,
The Martino one, right?
yeah,
That's yeah, yeah. He's he's known. He just likes to show interesting things. But um, I love the aesthetics of Death Walks at Midnight. There's another one. I don't know if it made it to the channel or not, but I think it's called Death Walks in High Heels.
yeah, it's another one. It's not on the channel. It's on Shudder, so I'm gonna try and watch that one because it's obviously
It's great.
the same filmmaker. I'm gonna try and watch that one at some point during the month as well because I have my Shudder subscription back. The one I least liked was Torso, because it's just it's basically just a softcore porn with like a few murders sprinkled around. You know, it's like they needed an excuse to be able to put a porno out, to mainstream audiences. So they're like, how are we going to get around all this copious amount of nudity and sex? Like, just throw a murderer in, and he can just kill them all as he goes. Like I clocked it at like it was 18 seconds before I saw a pair of boobs in this film. 18. Like that's quick. Even for porn, that's quick.
I was. It reminds me of. I don't know if this is still around, but when I was a teenager, there was this website called Mr. Skin that you could go and like it would tell you the exact second in any movie that had nudity in it. Um, that's kind of what you sounded like right now. You're like 18 seconds in, and then 3 minutes and 45 seconds was the next one.
It was a lot quicker than 3 minutes 45 seconds. It was like 18 seconds and 22 seconds and 24 seconds. It was constant. The only interesting thing about Torso is that it was made in 1973, but it does very much feel like an 80s slasher movie.
Oh, cool.
Um, it is kind of a little bit of ahead of its time in that regard, but um, yeah, I just didn't find it all that interesting, to be honest. Um, and then I just kind of rewatched a couple of things. I rewatched New Nightmare, rewatched The Innocents, the Deborah Kerr ghost story. Such a
Yeah,
good
yeah.
film. The Innocents is insanely good.
Is that a
Uh,
Radiance one?
no, no, no. Criterion and BFI did the release here.
Okay.
It's made by Jack Clayton. It's really great. Have you not seen The Innocents?
No,
Oh man, that's like one of the all-time great horror films. It's just a really great ghost story.
that's cool.
Very classic. It's based on Henry James, The Turning of the Screw.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
just like a classic kind of ghost story, but has these really cool like psychological layers to it, and the cinematography it has this really beautiful kind of black and white cinematography. It's from 1961, and it stars Deborah Kerr, um, who was in Black Narcissus, if you're into that.
Oh yeah.
Um, Phenomenal film. Highly recommend. I'm surprised you haven't seen it, to be honest. It's like considered one of the greatest horror films of all time. I'm sure if you pulled up They Shoot Zombies, you'll probably find it fairly quick, fairly fast. It's amazing.
No, I mean there's a ton of those that are right up there that I haven't seen, but
Mhm.
that's good to yeah, it's number 27.
Yeah, I was thinking it's so good. And
Isn't Deborah
then
Kerr from the Red Shoes?
um, she's not the lead in the Red Shoes. She may have been in the Red Shoes.
Oh, okay. Who was the lead?
I can
I
never
thought.
remember her name. Is like Moira something.
Oh, yeah, that's what it was. That's what it was. Yeah, 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 yeah. It was Moira. Cause never mind. It's Moira Shearer.
Yeah, that's it. Um,
But for some reason, I thought it was. Anyways, I got you.
Yeah. The only other thing I watched was as this is not a spoiler, I guess, but yeah, kind of a sneak peek at the next Radiance Films podcast episode, if anyone listens to that, where I'll be joined by a super special guest called Chris Haskell. Uh, I watched We Still Kill the Old Way, the new Petri one. It's fucking great. I don't know if you've had a chance to watch it yet. It's
No, it's.
really good. It's really, really,
I need
really
to.
good.
I need to make a separate list of the Petri films I've seen because it's getting up there now. A
This was only
combination
my
of
third, I
Arrow
think.
plus, yeah, Arrow Academy, Arrow Main, and now Radiance. There's a bunch, but he's such a cool voice of like, is this another kind of protest cinema?
It's kind of like you could certainly look at it that way. This one kind of plays out more like a neo-noir. It's kind of like if
Okay,
Chinatown was set in Sicily. Um, that's the
okay,
kind of
that's a
vibe
great
I got
film.
from it in terms of style and stuff. Like I don't know too much about the political angle to kind of say whether there is a political voice to it.
Okay.
Um, but I just thought it was a really cool kind of like neo noir. And I very much enjoyed it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to see this. I'll probably watch a few of those this week. And then that's one I'm very much looking forward to. I've been I've been all over the place. One of the ones that I was interested in was Terrence Young. He directed like the first three or four Bond films,
Yeah.
and then there was a movie he made with just like an absolutely loaded cast. It had like a little bit of an older Audrey Hepburn. It had Ben Gazzara. It had like it was just like this loaded cast, and it was called Bloodline. It's from 1979. James Mason was in it. Irene Papas, Michelle Phillips, Romy Schneider, Omar Sharif had a big role in it. Like this crazy Gert Froba from the Bond films. Like it was stacked, and no one's ever really heard of this movie. Um, or at least nowadays, like it doesn't get played at all. And I was curious about it because it came out on Vinegar Syndrome Labs, and so that's how I came across it. And apparently Audrey Hepburn really hated this movie. Um, and I was curious to see why. Um, Man, it's a mess.
This is
Like
Bloodlines, right?
Bloodline from 1979, yeah.
Yeah, as I remember, I listened to the episode where you were talking about that one, and I was like, "This sounds great. I really want to watch this film." So hearing you say that it sucks makes me less interested in
It,
watching it now.
it's a mess. I I don't even know how to really describe it, but it feels like maybe I need to watch it again now that I understand what it is versus what it isn't, but like it feels like a really cheap B movie, like drive-in B movie where everybody's overacting and like everything is highly stylized, but like I guess some people would call it really shitty. Like um it, I was just it was I couldn't really connect it that this was the guy that's I mean Terrence Young has made so many great movies and like a lot of people grew up watching Terrence Young films and even the writer of this was somebody that was talking about how excited they were to work with their kind of hero and all this stuff. But yeah, this movie is just a mess. Um, but other than that, been some great ones. Like I got to see a Fukasaku movie called Wolf, Pigs, and Men, where it has like two musical numbers in it, and you don't think of Fukasaku as like a musical guy, but it was interesting to see that. Then a couple of Bollywood horror movies, and then some of the stuff we're going to be talking about today. And I have a great example of a very quaint British detective horror. That's like, it's not super spooky, it's not super gory. It's just a very classic, like British detective story. It's on the Vinegar Syndrome released this thing called the Cruel Britannia set. It's three British horror movies. And the one on there called Penny Gold. It's great for like, fans of like Agatha Christie, um, uh, Poirot. I guess that's the same thing, but any of those kind of classic. I guess Sherlock Holmes to a point, but a little bit more of the like Agatha Christie style. But just a really good, interesting, fun detective story.
Yeah, I remember seeing that set when I was looking around on the website, and it looks good. I personally can't justify the prices of importing Vinegar Syndrome stuff. They do release films that I'm interested in, but I just can't justify the price of importing them, which is
I wonder if
unfortunate.
I wonder if Terracotta would ever, basically, because there's so many people in the U.S. that stock like Region B stuff, so you don't have to pay for shipping.
Hmm.
I wonder if Terracotta would ever do that, like in reverse, or if there's another retailer that would do that in reverse. Because yeah, it does kind of suck to have to pay shipping, or like what's it called? Umbrella from Australia will ship to the U.S. if you cross $100 or $150, something like that. But
Yeah.
that sucks because it's not so easy to do that all the time.
No, it's a big commitment to make, like especially if
Yeah.
you're if like you're buying a ton of blind buys.
Right.
It's
Right.
tough to make that commitment. Like it's the reason why like I haven't imported any Region A Criterions in years. Because like all the ones I really wanted to see I've already gotten, and I'm not gonna blind buy some and fucking import a ton of Region A Criterions when I can just maybe wait and see if another label here puts them out and I can watch them. So
There does
yeah.
seem to be a gap in the market for, because even if it was, let's say it was even based in Germany, where, physical media is huge in Germany still,
Mm.
right? I wonder if even if it was there, like it would still be cheap to ship it to Ireland, right?
Yeah, with the EU, it'd be very cheap to ship it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we wouldn't have any import fees or anything because it'd be coming from within the EU. I
Right.
suppose again the problem is getting it into the EU in the first place to then ship it out. So like whoever's selling this is going to have to import it and pay fees to import it, and those fees are going to be passed on to the consumer one way or another
That's
through
the thing, right? If you
the
do a shipment of like 1,000 or like 500 or something, it's that the cost that gets passed on is minimal, right?
I guess, yeah, but I suppose again, it's just about whether the market is there, I guess. Because at the end of the day, you know, for releases done by big labels like the Criterions of the world, for example, usually either Criterion release a region B or the film is big enough that somebody else will have a release for
Sure.
it.
Sure.
So like you'd have like obviously there's a huge market in the US for these Vinegar Syndrome-esque titles, but
Right.
whether the same appetite will be there, you know, in because like with like let's just say like I'm going to take a Vinegar Syndrome title as an example because obviously you're an expert in that field. But with Vinegar Syndrome releases, I assume even if they have subtitles, they would only be in English subtitles. I would assume they don't have German, French, Spanish,
Yeah, that's a
etc.
good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
So
You're right.
you're narrowing a market down to England and Ireland, which is not that many people. Um, it's, especially compared to America.
I mean,
So
technically the Nordics too, because their English is better than mine, but I I know what you're saying though. Yeah, if you're gonna commit to Europe, you almost have to be like kind of experienced in that a little bit to
yeah.
understand how to put all the German, but you probably go German, Spanish, French, and that covers a lot of it, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. If you hit the main ones like English, French, Spanish, German, Italian, you would cover a decent chunk.
But then that's extra
Um,
cost and all that other stuff.
oh,
So
exactly. That's the thing. You have to hire people to do translations and subtitles and all that kind of stuff. So you have to. The companies themselves would have to commit to putting out European releases, but then you get into gray areas about whether they have to then attain rights to release them in these regions, et cetera, et cetera. So, um, yeah, I don't think it's as easy um, as we might think it is.
well, anyways, not for us to solve today, but
No, not our
it
not
does
our
seem like
issue.
there's does seem like a small gap in the market. Not sure how big it is, but it's an interesting idea.
Well, look to kind of segue from smart business moves to smart business moves. Let's talk about the films we're going to talk about today.
Yes.
I guess. So I can't remember if we told people what we were going to be doing. I don't. I can't
Yeah,
remember.
I think we teased it, but
Okay.
it's been a while. Yeah.
Well, look, you can if you can read, then you know what the episode title is. So, we're going to be covering the whole Evil Dead series minus the TV show, because I don't have time for that. Minus the TV show over 2 episodes. So for this episode, we're going to be covering the original trilogy by Sam Raimi, and then we're going
Yeah.
to come back in a couple of weeks and we're going to cover the kind of two modern rebooty sequely films that were done by different filmmakers. So we're going to kick things off, of course, with The Evil Dead, which was released in 1981, directed by Sam Raimi. And the synopsis from Letterboxd reads as follows. In 1979, a group of college students find a Sumerian Book of the Dead in an old wilderness cabin they've rented for a weekend getaway. Sounds about right.
It nails it. I think it's important to say, and this is going to come up as we go through them. This was also written just by Sam Raimi, and I think that becomes important later on. So this is kind of like his project.
Yeah. So
Um,
in terms of before we get into like thoughts and personal experiences, Chris, do you have any stats for us?
Yeah. So it's I know this is not what you're asking about, but I do think it's kind of cool. So this is a movie that was made for $375,000, and
Yeah.
it's a decent amount of money to give somebody who was really young and like hadn't proven himself, right? So he got like real funding for this. And then the gross was I mean, this is one of those ones that's just made money forever. But the initial box office run was 2.5 million. So even in the initial box office run, this was a hit, kind of no matter, how you want to talk about it, right? Um, and it's cool to see. I mean, people just seem to really resonate with this movie. Um, do you want to take a guess as to where it is and They Shoot Zombies?
They Shoot Zombies. I would assume it's top 100.
It very much is.
Um, I'm gonna say somewhere between 50 and 75.
Okay. It is currently 14.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it is just below Dawn of the Dead and just above Bride of Frankenstein.
Okay.
So this movie is beloved.
It's better than Dawn of the Dead.
It's
I,
slightly. Oh, you're saying you like it better than Dawn of the Dead?
yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
think objectively it's better than Dawn of the Dead. Sure.
I don't know. I don't know that you can say anything objective about horror. There's
I
pretty
can.
passionate people in the. That's fair. But it is just outside of the top 1,000 overall. So it's 1,462 for They Shoot Pictures. Um, so yeah, this movie is, I mean, people, generations of people buy this movie and watch it and love it again. And this is one of the ones where, I've owned it 5 times across different formats. And, when Best Buy had an exclusive that was in 4K, I bought it again. Like I did sell off the other ones, but this is one of those ones that's just like sunk deep into the psyche of horror fans.
Hmm.
I mean, being made in 1981, I can't even imagine what the rental numbers for this were in video stores.
Well, this is the thing. Like, it's been such a huge, it was such a huge hit. From you know, in terms of like rentals and stuff like that, VHS and everything. Um, and it was also like I think what helped it as well was the kind of notoriety surrounding it a bit. Um, like I don't know if you know much about how it was received. I can't say for the rest of Europe anyway, but this film was banned in Ireland for a long time.
Yeah, it was a
Um,
controversial film, right?
yeah, and but that only entices more people to want to see it, especially when something gets unbanned. Everybody's like, "Well, let's all go watch the film that's been banned for, 10 years or whatever, and see what the big deal was." So that's like that kind of notoriety like does always help with numbers. Because it's only going to make you want to see it more. If you hear a film was banned because it was too whatever, you know,
Yeah. I
as
mean, the
soon as you
interesting,
can see it, you're going to try and see it.
it was technically not banned in the US, but it did get an X rating.
Yeah. It was
And
out
in
it was
Germany,
outright banned in Ireland. Like I have an interesting history with the first Evil Dead movie because like I was born in 94. I think this was
uh-huh.
banned up until the late 90s or maybe even 2000 in Ireland. But I first saw the Evil Dead. I can first remember seeing the Evil Dead when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old when it was banned. My dad had a bootleg
Nice.
of it. So my dad had a bootleg of the Evil Dead on VHS. And he decided this would be a great thing for me to watch when I was like 5. And it obviously scared the absolute living shit out of me. And for a long time, because A, I was shown it so young, and B, the notoriety surrounding it, I had assumed that this was like the scariest film ever. So like I didn't even watch it for years because I was like terrified to watch it because I had this, idea in my head that this was like the most horrifying film that could ever exist because it was
Uh-huh.
banned and it scared me so much when I was a kid. It was like that and The Exorcist. Those were like two films that I was just afraid to watch.
Sure.
For the same reason, because again, he also showed me The Exorcist when I was like 4 or 5. Um,
Gosh.
I know, crazy. Um, So it's funny now how much I love horror. Because for many years I was afraid of anything horror related because I was kind of scarred by that. But though that this film and The Exorcist were like my top, even as a teenager. Like I didn't watch The Exorcist until I was maybe 16, 17, because I was just too afraid. I was too afraid to watch it. And it was the same with Evil Dead. And it's funny now watching it now. Obviously I rewatched all these for this. I've seen all these films we're going to talk about today, but I rewatched them because it's been a few years. And it's so funny watching it back now because it is really good. It's a really effective film, and I love this movie. I think it's phenomenal, especially for
Yeah.
the money they spent. I think it's
Yeah.
phenomenal. Um, it's not that scary, you know. I don't really
No.
know what the big deal was.
No, that's the interesting thing, right? I mean, this is one of those ones that was a video nasty in the UK.
Hmm.
It was banned in Germany, and if you look at the list, it's like, Ukraine, Singapore, like it's just Finland. Like there was a lot of countries that immediately banned this as soon as they saw it.
Hmm.
And you look at it now, and I think I could be wrong about this, but I think the best they could do was get it to NC-17 in the US, even now. And if you're looking at it from, I guess, an objective amount of blood and um, violence in the movie, I guess there's an argument there. But if you're looking at it more from like tone and impact and like how you actually feel watching it, like it doesn't feel like an NC-17 movie at all.
No.
Or a movie that should ever be banned. Like it's a fun movie, right? A fun horror movie, I guess I should say.
Yeah, because like it is gory. It does have some rough scenes, the tree assault
Sure,
scene, for example.
sure.
Has some rough moments, but it never feel like as an overall film, it doesn't feel like a bad taste movie, if you know what I mean. Like
Exactly.
there's a lot of films out there that are almost made in poor taste, and they're needlessly violent, and they show a needless amount of gore just to be edgy, or just to try and like purposely make people queasy or whatever. It's kind of done in bad taste. Whereas
Yeah.
Evil Dead never feels like it's in poor taste. It's done because it's effective, and Sam Raimi had fun concocting this idea. Um, that's what all the kind of the hairier moments in this film. They never feel like it's being done to like you know obviously it's being done to scare the audience, but it's not being done to make the audience feel bad.
Yeah.
If you get what I mean.
I do. I mean, yeah, it was really, really fun to revisit this because I hadn't probably seen it in, I don't even know, like 15 years or something, even though, this is probably my 12th time seeing it, right? But
Mhm.
like, it's really fun to revisit it and see it now through the lens of all the other movies that I've seen since I saw it last. Yeah, I mean, this is just, you can tell this is somebody that's very good at storytelling, very comfortable behind the camera, like has a clear vision for what they want, is able to pull it off. Um, uh,
Yeah, there's a real confidence in
Confidence.
it's a very confidently directed film. That was one thing that jumped out at me this time watching it was how confident some of the shot composition and camera
Yeah.
movements and stuff. Like, I don't was this Sam Raimi's first feature? Because obviously I know he had made the kind of film to help finance this. Was this his first actual feature film?
Yeah, yeah. So the quick rundown is the short you're talking about is called Within the Woods, and that was
Yeah.
made for like $1,600. And they started shopping it around, and a lot of people actually disliked it, but it did get some um, attention, I guess. And they used that to go raise the money. And I think I could be wrong about this, but I think this is one of those kind of like, compelling stories about direct filmmakers that put up their, like house for collateral. Like I'm pretty sure Bruce Campbell put up either his property or his family's property to like finance this movie.
Well,
So they then they shopped it around, and it was so controversial the producer started eating it up, and like, shop, and like it played everywhere.
hmm.
That it wasn't banned, I guess, but it everywhere it played, it did really well. In terms of where this is in Sam Raimi's career, I don't think there was a feature before this. I'm just gonna
No,
double
I've
check that.
just I've
You said
just
that
pulled up Letterboxd. Looked like there was like a few shorts.
Yeah,
I was
I've always said this is his first movie, but now that we're putting it on a podcast, I wanted to double check.
well, actually, yeah. If it looks like there was a film called It's Murder that he made in 1977. It's 70 minutes long. It's definitely not a short film. Tells the story of a family whose uncle is murdered and he gets revenge. And it does have a decent number of watches on Letterboxd, so I don't think it's one of those ones where it's like a lost film or anything.
Okay. So
Um,
It's Murder is technically his first film. Yeah.
yeah, apparently it does seem that way.
And then just a
Um,
bunch of short films before that. But yeah, I mean, no doubt that this is the one that put him on the map.
oh, for sure. And like I said, it's just it doesn't feel, but it doesn't feel like an I suppose second time filmmaker if we're being technical. But it doesn't when you watch a film, it doesn't seem like someone who's early in their career trying to figure out their style, trying to figure. This is a guy who's putting out a statement of intent to say, "This is my style. Buckle the fuck up and enjoy yourself. It's going to be a fun ride." Even
Absolutely.
though, even though like the Evil Dead is definitely in terms of these first kind of the original trilogy, this is obviously the one that leans the most into pure horror. Um, which for spoilers, this is probably my favorite of the three, mainly because of that. Um, but it's still the kind of horror where, despite it not being a horror comedy, there is a certain level of, I guess, goofiness or hokiness, probably just down to the fact that everyone except for Bruce Campbell is not a very good actor. Um,
Yeah.
because obviously, why would they be? They're just a bunch of amateurs making a film,
Yeah.
um, which is absolutely fine. It's the same with like Night of the Living Dead and stuff. Or a lot of Carnival of
Exactly.
Souls. So many cheap films. The acting is not great because they're not professionals. So why would it be?
Yeah, exactly.
Um, Bruce Campbell just has that charm. He luckily has natural charisma, so he gets by on that alone. Um, but yeah, it really it honestly it blew me away watching it because as I said, like I hadn't seen it for a long time, and obviously I remembered so much about it in terms of where I remembered the plot, and there's specific scenes that are burned into my brain from when I was a child. The scene where one of the girls has her back turned and starts saying what's on the cards, and then
Oh
turns
yeah.
around. That scene has been burned into my brain for like 25 years. That's the one I always remember seeing when I was a child. That's the
The
one
the
that
one
always is back there. So I remembered all that stuff. But this what blew me away this time was how confident the rest of the film is from a technical point of view.
hmm Even if you look at special effects, you think about somebody who is working on effectively, well, not no money, but very little money. The special effects in this are awesome. Like this is a great example of why practical effects are so fun. Because it's just all makeup and prosthetics and stuff, right? But like it's just you can immediately tell when the possession or when the individuals become, I guess, possessed. You can immediately tell when the demons are there, and it's a very distinct visual style. Like the scene that's burned in my head is the clanging through the um, flap in the floor, like
Yeah.
going down to the basement, where they like chain it up, and then like the monsters are trying, or like the demons are trying to get out. Like that's the stuff that's burned into my head. And then like flipping back and forth between the humans whenever he tries to kill them, and then the demons to make it like difficult to actually hurt him.
Yeah, it's good. And
Do you think they had the everybody that worked on this movie slept in that cabin? Can you imagine how creepy that would have been?
yeah, I can only imagine like although at one point, like I suppose it depends on your mindset. But for me, I'd be like, well, I'm making a movie about horrible things, and movies aren't real, so therefore nothing horrible can happen to me in this cabin. But I can certainly see why some people would be creeped out making, a horror film in the same place you're sleeping, would set you on edge. Just to go back to your special effects point, what's also great, and which maybe is not talked about as much, is the sound design, that the kind of Foley work that was done to correspond with the special effects. That like no when the apple or no not the apple. There's a reason why I said apple. When the pencil goes into the ankle and starts getting like twisted
Ah,
around
yeah.
in that dude's ankle. The reason why I
Yeah.
keep saying apples because that's how they made the sound. They stuck a pencil into an apple and started squirt.
Ah,
That's how they did that's how the Foley artist got that sound. But it's so good. It
it is
fits
so
so
cool.
well. They really like that heightens it. The special effects are great, but the Foley work is really good paired with it to kind of really drive home and just kind of make it as realistic as possible. Which is weird to say about a supernatural horror film. Um, but yeah, there's so much stuff in there that kind of makes you squirm that wouldn't work as well if the sound design was not on point, which it is.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot that can be said on the technical side of this. Like I remember
Yeah.
on the when I was back in the old Anchor Bay days, they put this movie out like 4 times, and I was watching some of the special features. I'm pretty sure that they couldn't afford a Steadicam, so they had to go create their own camera that they gave it a different name, like I forget the name, like Shaky Cam or something. But they actually created their own camera, like technique to give it that distinctive look. Like, there's a lot, and it's even more prominent in Evil Dead 2, but there's a lot of like really quick zooms or like running through the forest
Yeah.
or
Running through the forest shots are always they're the ones everyone kind of remembers really.
yeah, exactly. And like there's so much creativity that had to go on because they had no budget essentially. So it's I don't know. It's just really cool. I think like this is a movie that, there was a one that's more on the art house side of things called um it's a Swedish movie and it was called oh, shoot, what is it? I can't believe I forgot the name. It's something yellow and then something blue. Criterion put it out.
Oh, I am
Um
curious.
I'm Curious Yellow, right? And that's another one that produced a similar amount of controversy, right? Different reasons, right? That was creating controversy because it made the United States define pornography.
I was gonna say that's the one with the famous line, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. And this one, in an interesting way, like this one had the same amount of controversy. Like everybody, but you can't really get to that level without making a good movie. Because if, there were movies made in Japan in the 70s and 80s that were way worse than anything we're talking about, and probably even in the US and in Eastern Europe. Like there's a lot worse movies coming out, but they never caught an audience for whatever reason. And so they kind of just go forgotten, right?
Mhm.
But this is just like such a fun movie to watch that like anybody that saw it was probably proselytizing and like very passionately, right? No, like you got to see this, right? Like this movie it goes to crazy places and like that kind of word of mouth, you don't really buy that. That just comes from making like a good movie that people
Yeah.
want to watch.
And I think it really just helps that it's a good time. Because if
Yeah.
this film was just like the most roughest piece of like stuff that kind of made you vomit and made you hate your life and made you depressed, nobody would talk about it. But because it's just fucking wild, but also a good time, then that those are the kind of films that make you go, to your friends or, and say, hey, you gotta watch this movie. It's just fucking wild. It was a crazy time. It was kind of like, the film that came out this year, In a Violent Nature.
Okay.
Um, you know, like I just went around and just told everybody to watch it because it was just fucking insane.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was
yeah.
it was just a crazy ride. It was no, it's certainly some would argue it's more dull than The Evil Dead. There's a lot of contemplative stuff in it, but when it gets going, it fucking gets going. Um, it doesn't let up, and it's a
Right.
crazy time. And I just went around just telling everybody to watch it, and that's because Zach told me to watch it, so he helped. And I'm sure Zach probably told a bunch of people, other people, to watch it too, because it's just a wild ride. And I'm sure The Evil Dead was like that as well. Somebody would see it, and then it would just spread and spread and spread about this crazy film called The Evil Dead, where there's tons of gore and crazy special effects and people getting their ankles stabbed with pencils. But then there's this really charismatic, goofy lead called Bruce Campbell. Uh, you know, um, so
Oh, totally. And before internet piracy was so big, it was just VHS bootleg, just the same way
Yeah,
your dad, right? There was always some video shop that had a couple of copies behind the counter and would like, if you knew them, they would give you a copy, right?
yeah, exactly.
Which made it more exciting. My favorite piece of trivia about this one is Joel Cohen came on to help with the editing process.
I remember reading this. Yeah, that's so random.
Yeah, and then they worked together later on the second feature, right? Crime Wave. They worked together on that. I think that was written by the Coen brothers, but
Okay.
but like they got to know each other through an editor. So there's an editor called Edna Paul who did a lot of the extra work because I guess they shot so much footage they didn't know idea what to do with it. So they
Hmm.
brought in like a real editor to help. And then that editor brought in Joel Cohen, and that's how they met. I think that's how the story goes.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it's cool that we talk a lot about it when I talk about all the Italian movies I watch or like the Japanese movies I watch. I always bemoan the fact that I wasn't born in Italy or I wasn't, 25 in Italy in the 70s. And just to be able to get plugged into these movies and the crazy stuff that was going on there. Because what a fun film scene, like across every genre. They were just doing some amazing stuff. At like 60s and 70s. And I kind of feel the same way about horror in the like late 70s, early 80s. There's all these filmmakers that were coming up right around then, and you could look across like Hollywood and kind of like the new Hollywood era, but then even in horror there and in all these I don't know. It's just fun. There's all these connections between all these projects around that time. So that must have been a really fun time to be a filmmaker.
Yeah. I was trying to remember how I knew that Joel Cohen was involved in The Evil Dead. Now I remember it was back when we did Blood Simple, because in the investor trailer for Blood Simple, they got Bruce Campbell to play the lead, and then I went down that rabbit hole. That was why I knew that Joel Cohen
Okay.
was
Okay.
involved in The Evil Dead.
Nice. Um, yeah, there's a lot of fun trivia about this film. Like I remember in order to get people, like get attention for it when it first released, he pulled some tricks out of William Castle's handbook. Like he hired an ambulance, I think, for the premiere, just in case anybody died of, shock.
That's
And
so good.
yeah, no, there's just like this is just one of those lightning in a bottle movies. It's just
Yeah,
right filmmaker, right moment. Like everything worked for Raimi, right?
yeah, and some would argue even more so for the next film.
Yeah, I mean, it might be a good transition. I don't know if you want to talk about
Yeah,
Evil Dead. No, I don't have too much else to say about it. I mean, this is just one of those. It's a foundational horror film and like foundational film for a reason, right? I think watching it now, is there anybody who shouldn't watch it? I mean, I guess it technically, does have a scene of sexual assault that's pretty graphic, but it it's like it's such a minor moment in the film, like a quick moment in the film. I I don't know. I don't think it would deter too many people,
no.
especially if you have a proclivity towards horror movies in general. Like I certainly wouldn't, sway you from seeing it.
And if you're like me, you can just skip it.
Or just fast forward it. Yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
knew it was coming, so I just skipped about 30 seconds and then it was done. So
Exactly.
easy peasy. The only last thing I'll say about The Evil Dead is I couldn't really I kept getting The Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 mixed up in terms of like how the plot kicks off. So like I was surprised when the kind of demons first kind of announced themselves and they're like, "Oh, we've been awoken from our slumber, blah blah blah."
Huh?
And I was just sitting there going, "You know what? Fair enough. I understand why these demons are pissed off. These fucking assholes just showed up. These demons have been asleep for hundreds of years or whatever. And these assholes just
Like
show
chanting.
up and wake them up. So you know what? Like I understand where they're. I fully back the Deadite. Or yeah, it is Deadites. No, am I
Yeah,
mixing?
yeah.
It is Deadites. Yeah, I thought I was mixing up Hellraiser for a second.
No, no, no.
Um, I fully back the Deadites in the Evil Dead. They're not the bad guys of this movie. It's the
No.
fucking assholes who show up and wake them up. They're the assholes here. It's the same with Godzilla. Whoever I always side with Godzilla because I too am a cranky asshole when I wake up. So
Sure, sure.
I always side with Godzilla, and in the case of the Evil Dead, I side with the Deadites because that would
Uh,
piss me off as well.
there's a funny YouTube short about how the world needs a thick Godzilla right now.
Mm.
I was just watching it this morning, funny enough. No, but yeah, there's not like, you know, it's the funny thing is in this movie, and then it even more so in, I guess, Evil Dead 2, they go into the mythology more.
Mhm.
But like this movie, it kind of happens by accident, right? It's
Yeah.
like they're just there, and they're like they find this stuff that's just hanging out in the cabin. And it is similar to Hellraiser. It's funny you bring that up in the way that they like unlock the bad stuff that happens in the film, right? Because in Hellraiser, it's like there's maybe somebody searching for it always. Cenobites is the word you're looking for there, by the
Yes.
way. Yeah.
Cenobites. Deadites, Cenobites, it's all similar.
Yeah, yeah. But the actual person that unlocks it usually is by accident
Yeah, they're just
or
fucking around.
yeah, exactly. And so that's the thing here is that, they need someone like Bruce Campbell because he's the only one that has the right amount of pain tolerance and gusto to knock them down once they wake up.
Yeah. Cool. We'll move on to Evil Dead 2 then, which came out a good few years later, 1987, which when I was reading about this, I think it was Dino De Laurentiis approached Sam Raimi about making an Evil Dead sequel, and Sam Raimi wanted to do the medieval stuff that obviously happens in Army of Darkness. And Dino De Laurentiis was like, no, no, let's make a film that's more like the first film. So Sam Raimi said, okay, and just made the first film again. Because he's a fucking, because, that's, why not? If you're being handed a shit ton of money and the guy says make a film like the first one, you're just gonna make the first one again.
Sure.
I think this must be like the only film where like the sequel is basically a remake of the original, because it's not a sequel. It doesn't pick up where the first film left off. It's basically a reboot of the
It
first
does
film.
expand it though. Like
Oh,
it
for sure. It changes a lot of elements. It doesn't have the group of kids. It's just Ash and his girlfriend, but then obviously more characters show up. But it's not a sequel. I don't like nobody can say it's a sequel to the first film because it doesn't follow on from where the first film left off. This is essentially a brand like even though it's Bruce Campbell playing Ash, it's not the same Ash as the first film. I like to think of them as Ashley and Ash because they all call him fucking Ashley in the first film
uh-huh.
rather than Ash. Um,
Yeah.
so this is Ash. This is not Ashley. This is Ash, and this is a brand new kind of what's the word I'm trying to think of? Continuity, I
Yeah,
guess.
that's right.
Um,
Yeah, it's a whole new
so
timeline kind of.
yeah, it's not a it's yeah it's Evil Dead 2, but it's not a sequel. It's basically a remake with like
That's right.
expanded ideas.
We,
Um,
yeah.
but I'll give you the synopsis from Letterboxd and we'll get into the nitty gritty. So Ash Williams and his girlfriend Linda find a log cabin in the woods with a voice recording from an archaeologist who had recorded himself reciting ancient chants from the Book of the Dead. As they play the recording, an evil power is unleashed, taking over Linda's body. Yeah, that's the movie.
Yeah. It's like it's funny because it's talked about as a trilogy, and that's probably appropriate. Like, I mean, it is certainly a trilogy, but it really is like Evil Dead 2 and then Army of Darkness sort of complete whatever you need to know about this.
Yeah,
Like you don't Evil Dead, it's fun to watch Evil Dead just because it's a hell of a movie. But if you're just strictly going for like completion on the mythology of it, like you basically start here and then they do a little bit of more like introduction to what the book is, and then they get into it, and then they bring in other characters like almost like an adventure type of characters that are like, Indiana Jones type people that are like looking like track all going all over the world tracking this down, and then it quickly descends into just like what's the word, like a horror movie, trapped inside the house. But yeah, no, it feels to me like a little bit not quite like what Aliens did to Alien, but they just kind of made everything bigger, I think, right? And put more humor in the film. But this was also beloved by critics a lot.
hmm
If Evil Dead 1 is 14, do you want to take a guess on where Evil Dead 2 is, or should I just say it?
Um, Evil Dead 1. I think this is probably higher, just as I know critics. Um, I would say top 10.
Yeah. Funny enough, it's gonna reverse when we go to They Shoot Pictures, but this is 19, so it's slightly lower.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I agree with that personally, and I know that's controversial, because a lot of people prefer Evil Dead 2. But I agree with that ranking, which is interesting.
Well, yeah, so there's a couple I want to get into that in just a second because that's relevant to why I highlighted the fact that Sam Raimi was by himself as a writer in the first one because he has a contributor here, but it is a top 1,000 movie according to They Shoot Pictures.
Okay.
It is 810 overall.
Right. So I guess if we're looking at the what's the word, patterns here, it seems like the people who love strictly horror films rate Evil Dead higher, which makes sense because this is obviously, like you said, leans into other genres quite a bit. But the people who are just criticizing film as general prefer Evil Dead 2, perhaps for that same reason, because it leans into
That's
stuff
what it
that's not
seems
just
like. Yeah.
horror. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. The other interesting thing about this has a tie-in of like a lot of people. Like Stephen King was the one that brought it to Dino De Laurentiis.
Oh, okay,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, and they got in the special effects team. They brought in like heavy hitters. Like Greg Nicotero was on this, who became famous from the George Romero team, right? And like Robert Kurtzman, who would go on to win awards for his special effects work, and Tom Sullivan. Like the team that was working on this movie was highly professional special effects folks, right? So this is not them like trying to figure out how to make a liquid white so it looks like pus. This was like they brought in a team to make everything look just sticky and like gross and bloody and uh we didn't talk about this, but I think in all three films they have spurts of blood, right? Not like little bits of blood, but like somebody broke a fire hydrant and it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
gushing blood, right? I think that's in all three films. For sure it starts here. I can't remember if it's in the first one. Um, but yeah, so it's always weird to talk about horror movies in the 80s because they lean so heavily into the home video market. It only made $6 million in the box office on a $3.5 million budget, but this was never considered a commercial failure. Like this movie was sold across every country and it did great financially for the producers.
Yeah, because I can only imagine that this was just Evil Dead, the film that, you know, scared everyone so bad that they banned it. It's like that, but like I don't want to say watered down. I feel like it's harsh to say this is watered down. It's just it's made for people who maybe didn't like the straight horror. You know, it has the comedic elements. It has, you know, like you said, that kind of like explorer, adventure, action adventure style kind of film involved in it. It expands a lot on the mythology, which
Yeah.
I feel makes it more perhaps easier to watch as a general audience member because you don't have to worry too much about the ambiguity. Like with if you like watch The Evil Dead, it's just like these demons are killing people for no reason and we don't know where they're from or what they do or where they are. And then like from a practical point of view, it's because they just didn't write it because they didn't need to write it. It's not the what type of film they were trying to tell. Um, but you know, when they expand on that so much and when you can offer an explanation for the things that are happening and why they're happening, it makes it a little bit less scary
Yeah.
because there's less of that unknown factor. Um,
Yeah.
so I think all of those things combined probably made it more palatable for different markets.
But I think it was intentional. So the guy who co-wrote this film, Evil Dead 2, was somebody. His name was Scott Spiegel, and he was a childhood friend of Raimi, and he was with him on that first short film, Within the Woods. But if you look at where his career, I mean, you never can tell when they're in high school. But if you look at where his career went, he seemed to be more business minded. So in that case, I would translate that to making stuff that's like slightly more populist, I guess, right? Because Sam Raimi was making something that was like for a very specific audience, and Scott Spiegel seemed to have a voice or like instincts towards something that was a bit more general. I guess I should say it that way. Um, because he would go on and there's crazy lore around Scott Spiegel. Like he at some party he introduced Quentin Tarantino to Lawrence Bender, so he got money for Reservoir Dogs. Like he went on to go fund a company with Eli Roth. Like there's just a lot of interesting lore around this guy Scott Spiegel. But he does seem to have good instincts for what's going to sell. And this movie certainly plays. It's all, you know what this reminds me of? Have you by chance seen the House movies? The not the Japanese House.
No, I know the one you're talking about because I think Arrow put out a set, but I've never seen them.
Okay. So they did something similar in House either two or three where they introduced this like time traveling aspect to it. And they go back and there's like stop motion and there's a lot of crazy special effects and like it's nowhere near as good as Evil Dead 2, but it is a similar type of thing where they're just sort of playing with like what they can do with this world that they created, you know? And so it's fun. I love it when horror movies do this. I love it when
Hmm.
sequel like this is why I love horror franchises so much because you get to see the way that the writers are like sitting there thinking what they can do differently within the world that they've created, you know?
Yeah, like I don't think anyone can argue to say that Evil Dead 2 is not creative, it's not different, it's not interesting. It like in terms of the creative pivot that it takes, you know, I can't think of another horror franchise that takes such a drastic creative pivot. I guess you could argue Alien and Aliens, like you already said, where it goes from more the kind of quiet, sort of stalkery, slashery film to the big bombastic action film for that that only idiots enjoy because fuck Michael Bay. We can say that because Zach's not here. Um, but anyway, yeah, but Evil Dead, it like I can't really think of other franchises that and even just in general, obviously we'll touch on this a little bit more in Army of Darkness, but like there's a lot of creative pivots
Yeah.
in these first three films. Like every film is so different from one another. And obviously there's consistencies in terms of, Bruce Campbell's character, he gets a little bit goofier for each film, but he's pretty much the same person as he's always been. Obviously the Deadites and stuff, they have similar powers and stuff for each film. They don't suddenly gain new powers or anything. I don't, as far as I can remember. So there's consistencies, but there's so much different in each film, and obviously it's like I said, it's more obvious with Army of Darkness because it's just a completely different type of film in general.
Totally.
But with Evil Dead 2, there obviously there's just all the added elements from different genres, plus the changes to the story, plus the expansion on the mythology that goes to try and explain why all the events are happening, whereas the first film was kind of happy, just leave you in the dark and just have you deal with the aftermath without giving you any information. Um,
Yeah.
so like I understand why some people like Evil Dead 2 more. I personally prefer the first film just again because I just like the more straight action, or not straight action, straight horror.
Yeah.
I'm not really a huge comedy horror guy. I like the only one I can think of off the top of my head be something like Shaun of the Dead. You know, I'm not really a big horror comedy guy. Um, because yeah, I don't really have a reason. I understand why comedy and horror go together because essentially they're the same type of film. It's all about build up at a punchline.
Right.
So comedy and horror are essentially the same thing, from a synthetic point of view.
Right.
Um, but I don't really vibe with them too much, I guess. So like I still recognize Evil Dead 2 is great is a really good film. I can recognize that from a critical point of view. It's really good. It's a really creative film. Like with the first film, it's probably even more creative because of course Raimi's a bit more experienced at this point, a bit more confidence, has a lot more money behind him to do things he wouldn't have been able to achieve in the first film with the budgets involved. So it's an incredibly creative film. I love that shot where Bruce Campbell's getting chased around the house and the doors keep getting bashed open. Every time he
Yes.
closes the door and it just bashes open behind him. I love that. So there's a lot of stuff in this film to enjoy, and I totally get why people like it more. I prefer the first one, but yeah, Evil Dead 2 is great. It's just a good time, I guess. It's a great way to spend 80 odd minutes.
Well, and it is knowing what Army of Darkness is, this is
Yeah.
definitely a segue, right?
Hmm.
Like this starts to kind of tease some of the stuff that's going to play a bigger role, like in what becomes more of just almost like a Laurel and Hardy kind of slapsticky comedy, and
Hmm.
for a big chunk of it, right? Not to get too much ahead, but yeah, I mean, I think what I like about so Evil Dead 1 and 2 in my mind are they are worth seeing, even though they are essentially like it's essentially a remake of the first one, because they're different enough. And I think I don't know where I sit. I might like Evil Dead 1 better as well, because there is something nice about not having things explained
Yeah.
and like having it open to the imagination of where it comes from and what it could mean. And I like that, I think. So yeah, I probably like one better as well. But two is probably a more fun like party movie.
Yeah, I think if not that I ever like talking about objectivity, but I would say like objectively speaking, Evil Dead 2 is probably the better film in terms of just being a more fleshed out piece of,
Yeah.
a work, you know. Um, but I like simple movies, and Evil Dead is just a simple horror that's done really well. It's really creative. But the story is very simple. Some kids rock up, some demons get let loose, the demons try and kill the people. It's a very simple, straightforward film. It doesn't get bogged down in the mythology that I feel Evil Dead 2 and to an extent, but definitely Evil Dead 3 gets a bit bogged down in this kind of mythology. Where you actually kind of have to pay attention to what they're talking about when they're on about the Necronomicon and all the shit that's going on. You feel like you have to work hard now.
Yeah.
Whereas with Evil Dead, you just get to sit back and watch some people get creatively possessed and murdered, which is fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I was trying to think if there's because we're going to talk about comedy here in just a second, I think in
Mm.
more in a more prominent way. It's if you look at what Sam Raimi's career was in between Evil Dead 1 and Evil Dead 2, he didn't really direct that much, right? He was a part of
No.
Crime Wave, which was a failure, unfortunately. And then, I mean, like a commercial failure, not saying if it was good or not. And then he did like a music video for Iggy Pop, and then another short film, and then oh no, that was afterwards. Sorry, he did some more shorts, and he just kind of sat there for a few years. Like it's interesting. I feel like I should know this by now. I'm surprised this hasn't come up in any of the behind the scenes stuff that I've seen. But I wonder if it's because it was banned in so many countries that it took a while for Evil Dead to get that groundswell. And then, because it looks, I mean, it all of a sudden there's just 4 years where nothing happened. And then all of a sudden he got Crime Wave and then, went right into Evil Dead 2, went right into Dark Man, and then right into Army of Darkness. Pretty back to back.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably something to do with that. When like like we all talk about films getting success off of word of mouth, but it takes time for the word of mouth to go around, you know? So there probably was a case where the reputation of Evil Dead had to build up over a couple of years
Yeah.
before, the big producers and distributors and companies, etc., started to kind of realize, oh, okay, this Evil Dead movie is it's getting some buzz. This filmmaker seems like a creative guy. Let's try and get him involved in some projects. Because Sam Raimi was approached to direct Thinner by Dino De Laurentiis. Um, that's kind of how, because obviously you mentioned the Stephen King connection already, and that was a Stephen King connection. Dino De Laurentiis approached Sam Raimi to direct a version of Thinner, and it didn't work out, but Dino kind of kept him in his head to say, we'll try and get this guy another project at some point.
Yeah, I would love to do a deep dive into Dino De Laurentiis one day. He's such a fascinating presence in the film industry.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything else on Evil Dead 2. I mean, I think for me, you just kind of I bemoan when series typically take like a drastic difference in tone. Like it's one of the reasons I don't like Aliens is because I like Alien a lot, and I
Hmm.
just enjoy that better than making Sigourney Weaver into an action star.
Yeah.
Um, but this one I don't mind the change of tone. It's just kind of I think partially because I grew up with it, so I don't really have like a it's nostalgia is too hard to separate from how I feel about this. It was just watching it again, I remember super impressed with the special effects, and it makes sense knowing the team behind it. Um, Impressed with the how they blew up the world into something that fit really well into Army of Darkness, and then we'll get into Army of Darkness in a second. But I thought it was a cool way to again like take the franchise, and I wonder if there was. I'd like to hear the story of another movie in this world that was never made because it feels like it would have been easy to make another story in this world that they created because there's so much you could do with the Necronomicon now that this is out there, right?
Hmm. Yeah, we'll kind of touch on that a little bit more in the next episode when we talk about the newer films,
Yeah.
with how they kind of how they're moving forward with the franchise without, Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi being involved. And I get like I don't know, before we get into Army of Darkness, have you seen the TV series Ash versus the Evil Dead? Because I haven't. So I don't really know if what they do with that from a mythology point of view.
So I have this, I don't know if this is true, but I have this image in my head. If you look at Bruce Campbell's career outside of The Evil Dead, and like, he was in like Jack of all trades and like Briscoe and the County Kid or something like that, or Briscoe the County Kid or something like that. Like he was all the stuff that he got involved in has a strong comedy element to it.
Mhm.
Seems like he has a good, he's famous for his strong jaw, right? Like he has a good strong jaw, but he does a lot of physical comedy and he's like a comedian as a performer, right? He can play he's almost like a strong man's version of like Carrie Elwes or something. I hope I'm
Yeah.
saying his name. Hope I'm saying his name right. But like so Ash and the Evil Dead fits in that tone, like, it still has horror in it, but like it's more it fits more in the like Bruce Campbell tone, I think, than like the Evil Dead tone.
Okay.
Yeah. It's much lighter and sillier and stuff, but yeah. It's fascinating to he's one of these people that has if he never works again, his career is set just from going to conferences. Like it's interesting how each generation there's a group of people that like discover Bruce Campbell and become obsessed with him pretty quickly.
Hmm.
So he's done a good job of, I think, positioning himself as something like a cult kind of genre icon and really leaning into that on the conference circuit and stuff. I remember being swept up in that when I was first getting to know him. He was such a compelling person. But
Okay.
anyways, you're asking about Ash and the Evil Dead. Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward. It's much lighter.
Okay. Well, we'll kind of continue that thread line and we'll talk about the worst film of the franchise. Uh, Perhaps I'm being controversial. We'll talk about Army of Darkness, which came out in 1992. So another little bit of a jump in the time. The synopsis from Letterboxd is Ash, a handsome shotgun-toting, chainsaw-armed department store clerk, is time warped backwards into England's dark ages where he romances a beauty and faces legions of the undead. Yeah, that's what the movie's about. Can I just say, whose fucking idea was it to show England but film it in a fucking desert?
All the desert part of the United Kingdom.
Well known, England, well known for their deserts. So yeah,
I guess that's a good point. You're talking about when he like drops into that world and
yeah,
it's like
it's just in the fucking desert. There's not like that doesn't exist. I just found that funny, and I always have found it funny that he's just in a desert for no reason. Um, but yeah. So with Army of Darkness, I was only half joking when I said it's the worst film of the franchise. It's personally my least favorite of the three. Again, just because it moves so far away from what I like so much about the original. Um, but and I guess this is why the film is called Army of Darkness as opposed to Evil Dead 3 or whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
It's very much its own film.
Yeah.
Um, you only barely need to have even really seen the Evil Dead movies. Like I'm sure somebody could probably watch Army of Darkness and figure it out.
Well, this is like one of those bridge movies into horror, right? Like when I don't know exactly the age, but at some point I'll show Owen Army of Darkness well before other horror movies
Hmm.
because it leans so hard into the comedy. I think it's an interesting intro into horror and overall,
Yeah, it
right?
leans super into comedy. Obviously, it has that whole medieval setting. So, it's because it takes place in a medieval setting, it's almost like a fantasy land.
Yeah,
So the horror feels subdued because it's not like real life, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah.
Things are less scary when it's in the past because it feels like it's not real. Um, so I think there's that as well, and I think just generally it just leans like really far away from the horror. Obviously, there's some, there's some scene. I was about to say groovy scenes, and I didn't mean to say groovy. Um, but there's a few scenes like obviously the pit. That's the one that we remember the best, I'd say, from a horror standpoint. That kind of fight in the pit, and then there's the whole kind of ending sequence, where he's fighting like fighting the Deadites and stuff like that. Um, so it does lean like it. If you put this film, like if you skip Evil Dead 2, like let's just say you didn't know Evil Dead 2 existed and you went from the first film to this film, that would be such a huge tonal whiplash.
Yeah,
You really do need that bridge of Evil Dead 2 because
yeah,
it
right.
does it sets you up. Because Army of Darkness is just they're just like it's like two films, well, obviously two films. It's like two completely different series, different filmmakers, different creative teams. It's like there's if you cast somebody other than Bruce Campbell, it's like there's no connective tissue
Right.
between where the series started and where it is now.
Yeah, that's right. I was thinking when I rewatched this again, how much this is like a Ray Harryhausen movie
Yeah.
once it gets going.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it definitely has a kind of old school fantasy, like a
yeah,
Sinbad or something.
yeah. Like
It
the
definitely has
stakes
that
are
old
never
school.
that high, right?
No.
But in a fun way, like in a relaxing, like it's technically a horror, but like it's not something you watch to get scared. It's just something you're like into to kind of like be around the world of horror.
Yeah, it's like, you want to watch a fantasy film, but it has a few spiky moments that
Right.
will tickle those kind of horror, you know, uh, I'm trying to think of a straight fantasy film that has something similar, and I'm struggling. Maybe
Oh, I mean,
Labyrinth, I guess. I guess, Labyrinth can be a bit scary sometimes. Um,
I think Labyrinth is darker than this. There was
Probably
all
is,
those
yeah.
there's all those movies in the 80s where Jim Henson was involved with like Dark Crystal and a lot of these kind of things. They were all
Return to Oz.
that's a
Return
good
to
one.
Oz is horrifying.
Yeah, that's a good call out. Yeah, Return to Oz is nightmare fuel. But I guess it just quickly look, we forgot to go over the numbers on this.
Oh
So this
yes.
was, I mean, which is it's fine, but it's interesting because in my mind this has always been the one that would have been like a box office flop,
Mm.
but it did okay. Like it's an $11 million budget, so they got a lot of money for this, and it made 22 million in the theaters.
So what was the age rating on this film?
Oh yeah, that's a great call. Actually, I didn't check that.
Like I would
Um,
guess it's PG-13.
yeah, does it have it in the just general? Let's see.
IMDb might have it.
I don't know. But while you're looking this up, they were yeah, I'm not sure. Um this is one where a lot of the budget because there's no real like star, right? I mean, Bruce Campbell is the star,
Yeah.
but Bruce Campbell is not demanding $30 million,
No.
right? So there's no real like this is not a movie built around a star. I guess you could say Embeth Davidtz to some point is, she's at least somewhat famous, but like Ian Abercrombie was a good character actor. I mean, there's people in this that were known, and I think Bridget Fonda was um in this as well. I
She
think
was, yeah, Bridget Fonda was in this.
she She played Linda, right? So, but like this was not a movie where the budget went to actors, is my point. So this most of $11 million went into special effects here and cinematography, and I think it shows. Like this is a to me this is a very beautiful film in the fantasy world. I think the special effects are fun. I wouldn't say they're, it's again, it's a practical effects movie. But like I love there's a scene where Bruce Campbell he he goes in and like he's trying to figure out there's three books and he's trying to figure out which one is the Necronomicon. And the first one basically like tries to suck him in
Yeah,
and he comes in and his face is stretched and he keeps shaking his head and
yeah,
every time his face is like looks different and it's all physical effects and prosthetic work and like that's that kind of stuff is fun, right? And it looks great when it's practical effects. Like you can tell they're having a lot of fun with it.
yeah.
But yeah, it is just sticking on the numbers while you look up the rating.
I have the
It's
ratings here if you're interested.
yeah, what is it? Sure.
So it was originally rated R, and it's since been re-rated to PG-13.
Yeah, this is definitely not an R-rated movie by today's standards.
No, exactly. By today's standards, it wouldn't be, which is why it's been re-rated
Yeah.
PG-13. But when it was originally certified, it was certified R.
I could, because there's that funny thing about Toby Hooper trying to convince the board that, or the MPAA that Texas Chainsaw was a PG film. I could see this movie making an argument there
Oh, I
if you,
would, yeah, I'd say so too. Yeah.
yeah, this movie more than Texas Chainsaw. But this was 166 all time on They Shoot Zombies. So it's
166.
one
Okay,
six.
it's
So
a
it's
bit
right
jumped
a
down.
little, yeah, a little bit below movies like Cat and the Canary, From Dusk Till Dawn, The Hills Have Eyes. It's a little bit below that.
Okay.
The original Gremlins. And then They Shoot Pictures has it quite a bit lower. So it's like 6,091.
6,000. Yeah. Like I know like there's a lot of people who love Army of Darkness. Army of Darkness fans are fucking rabid.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They love the shit out of this film.
Yep.
But I get where the critics are coming from.
Yeah.
I understand it. Just back to the ratings quickly as a segue. Labyrinth was PG. Uh, like if Labyrinth was PG, then Army of Darkness should have been PG 13, I'd
Absolutely.
say.
Or PG. Like, I mean, I think some of the stuff that happens in Labyrinth and Dark Crystal and these ones are like, I think darker than anything that happens in Army of
I
Darkness.
suppose it's more thematically dark, whereas Army of Darkness has a part where blood shoots out of a pit.
Yeah.
So I guess that's probably what did it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, for sure. No, there's no shortage of blood here for sure. They have fun with it. Um, this one, I was watching it now and I was thinking it's funny how you see filmmakers like influence each other, right? Because I felt a lot of Harryhausen influences here, and maybe I said Laurel and Hardy, probably more Three Stooges, really, in terms of the humor. But then I was watching and seeing how similar Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings was. Do you remember there's the scene where man, I'm just gonna think Deadites now, but in Two Towers, there's a scene where the army of the dead from like the Lord of the Rings world, there's a that mean like leader, and he's waking people up out of the clay, and they're like building this like machine of war that felt exactly the same as this
What
movie.
for? What version of the two? Granted, I've not seen the Two Towers in about 15 years, but I have no idea what the fuck you were talking about.
No, 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 no. Okay, so in the movie, like this is it's in the book and the movie. Like this is just like a part of the series, right? So there's
Okay.
like, what is the,
Army of the Dead. I know that the Army of the Dead from the Return of the King.
it's possible this is in Return of the King, but like, maybe it's possible I'm getting the where it is in the franchise mixed up a little bit. But there's that scene that Christopher Lee is like governing the destruction of
Oh, the Uruk-hai. Yeah, yeah,
the
and they're being
Uruk-hai.
built out of the mud and stuff.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
I
yeah.
know, yeah, that is two terrors. Yeah, the Urukai. I know exactly what you're talking about. Actually, I think that's
Sorry.
even Fellowship of the Ring. Well, it doesn't
Okay,
matter. Yeah, but I know
maybe
what you
it's
mean.
earlier. But that scene, there's like the main like bad Uruk-hai, I guess, or whatever, the main
Yeah,
bad.
Lars. Yeah.
And okay, yeah. And he is like waking people up and telling them to get to work and all that.
Hmm.
And that's like a scene for scene remake almost, just in that little contained scene of the scene here in Army of Darkness where the lead Deadite is waking up all the skeletons and telling them to get to work and like getting on them and they're kind of building this like machine of war. I thought that was a
Mm.
cool callback to Army of Darkness.
Yeah, and like you would know for sure that Peter Jackson's definitely an Evil Dead fan. Just obviously with the stuff he did before.
I would put a lot of money on
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
I'd put my house on it that
Yeah,
he's seen the
exactly.
Evil Dead movies.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
so interesting.
Yeah.
Um, I know we didn't touch on spoilers much for most of this, but I feel like I feel like I kind of have to talk about the ending a little. Well, and one of endings, I guess. I assume
Yeah,
you're aware of the multiple endings and stuff like that.
yeah, I
Uh,
think we're an hour and a half into this. Like we can do a spoiler warning, right? And we can talk about endings now. I think from here on out, I'm good with that.
cool. I feel like this is like really controversial in terms of which ending people prefer. Um, so naturally, I had only ever seen the European ending, um, which is the one where he drinks too many drops. I'll just kind of say that just to kind of avoid spoilers as much as possible. The ending I had always seen was the one where he drinks too many drops, um, which is a fucking great ending because it just kind
Yeah.
of sums up his character so much. Because the whole way through the film, they're all giving him like very important pieces of information. And he's just like, "Nah, I know better than you. I don't need to listen to this shit."
And you're getting it
Just a bit of an asshole about the whole thing. So the ending is just perfectly ironic because it's kind of what he deserves, for just for the way he's acted throughout the whole film. I think it's a really great ending. Um, but then I'd heard about and sought out and watched what I'll call the S Mart ending, and that is fucking terrible. Um, and I'd like to know which is your preference. I know that Zach is a European ending guy, so that's two in the corner for European ending. But I'd like to know which is your preferred ending.
I'll answer indirectly, but the answer is European cut. But do you remember? Um, did you ever read the Dark Tower series by chance?
I've read most of it. I've never finished it, but I know enough about the lore to get by.
So you get all the way to the seventh book, right? It's a long journey to get through seven books, right? And the story ends in a particular way. And then Stephen King says, "Look, I know this is not going to satisfy everybody. If you want, if you really want like a concise, known, like definite ending, read on. If you don't, please don't read on because you'll hate it."
Okay.
And I was happy with the ending because I like a little bit of ambiguity and I didn't feel there's people that argue that it's like a disappointing ending after you go through seven books to get to the way it ended. But I liked it a lot. It was like I thought it was really creative. Um and not, and but then he does a thing in the epilogue where he sums it up in a way that would be like his equivalent of like a Hollywood ending. And I hated it so much. I wish I had never read it. And that's kind of how I feel about this. Like the idea that well, I guess we're not doing spoilers. The idea that the first way he ends it, or the European cut, if you want to save it that way, um, is just a more appropriate finish for Bruce Campbell's character.
Yeah.
It's just who he is. Um, but
I suppose
yeah,
it depends on, well, you say that, right? But I suppose you could read both endings as being almost two different, like the two aspects of Ash's personality. Because there is the S Smart ending guy, where he's this, cool dude with a fucking shotgun who's killing the dead, because that's what he's been doing for the last three movies,
right.
I guess. But then there is also the kind of the aspect of Ash where he is a bit self-involved, a bit self-indulgent. He thinks he knows best. He thinks he knows what's the best thing to do and doesn't really listen to other people. And then that side of him gets what he deserves in the European ending and the drops ending. So I think people could argue that either ending is appropriate for Ash's character, but I think the European ending sets. I think there's more of a precedent in terms of what happens previously in the film, because obviously there's the scene like you mentioned with the books where he doesn't listen to the and he's like told to you need to remember this phrase because you're gonna need this phrase when you get to the books, and he does and he gets to the books and he's like I don't remember the fucking words because
Yeah.
and it's kind of like that's almost like I can't remember the word now, but it's almost like they've set it up, ahead of time. They've kind of a foreshadowing. That's the word I'm trying to think of. It's almost like foreshadowing
Oh,
to the ending, as it
uh-huh.
ends up being a similar situation. He doesn't really pay attention, and that's what ends
Yeah,
up fucking him over.
right.
Um, so that's why I feel the European cut is a bit more appropriate because I just feel it ties in well with what happened earlier in the film. Um, but then there is going to be some people who'll argue that the S-Mart ending is more appropriate for his character if you have a more optimistic outlook on Ash, I guess.
And that allows him to go into Ash versus the Evil Dead and all
Of
that kind of
course,
stuff. You
not
know
that
what I mean?
continuity matters in this series, but
Not
of
at
course, yes,
all. No, yeah, I don't know. The interesting thing is, and again, like to the thing you just said, continuity is not extremely important here. But he goes from being one of a party of four or five that I mean, he panics a lot, but he generally helps his friends out, like in the first one, right? And then the second one, he becomes somebody who's like wrestling with the Necronomicon and kind of like there's a lot of scenes where it doesn't seem like he has the ability to sort of deal with all of this. Like he's not portrayed as this like instant hero.
no,
Um, but he's kind of getting used to it and kind of learning like the rules and how it works within him and like uh yeah, you just see him like almost like wrestling with it. And then you go into the third movie and he's like an action hero. And it's an interesting change because all of a sudden the dialogue gets quippier. It's probably worth mentioning that the writer on the co-writing credit on this movie is Ivan Raimi,
his brother, yeah,
brother. Yeah, so it's Scott Spiegel's not around at least formally, and it's Ted. I mean, it's not Ted Raimi. It's Sam Raimi and Ivan Raimi, and they so maybe that's where more of the slapstick comes. Maybe this is just multiple sides of Sam Raimi's personality, not sure. But he goes into this like straight action hero, and it's kind of an interesting shift because there's no real reason why he goes from being just a kind of a regular guy to knowing how to outfit his car into like a death helicopter car or like knowing how to build, pretty intricate um, weapons out of an iron glove hand when he cuts his hand off. There's like he becomes sort of what is the word that you and Zach use sometimes? Is it Mary Sue, or the person like
yeah,
the
Mary
person?
Sue. Yes, it's a derogative term used for female characters who gain powers seemingly very out of nowhere.
Okay, fair enough. And he kind of becomes that way here, I think, a little bit.
Yeah,
But with the way the story goes, it doesn't really matter because at the same time, it has jokes like mini ashes come out of a mirror and torment him. And there's a scene where he has to peel his face off of a hot griddle with a spoon. So like, it's like it's a very silly movie. Like there's a lot of physical comedy here, and I think it's more just them having fun and not really worrying too much about the logic of it all.
hmm yeah. Any final thoughts on Army of Darkness or any of the films before we wrap things up?
I just had such a blast revisiting all these. It
Oh,
was
same.
fun.
Yeah, for sure. Like I have my issues with all the films, I guess, to an extent. But one thing I can say is I had a good time, and I don't always get to say that on this podcast. So this was nice.
Have you seen the new ones yet?
Yeah, I've seen them all. The newer ones we're going to be talking about next week. So that is Fede Alvarez, if I remember his name correctly.
Yep.
That's his rebooty remake, and then there was Evil Dead Rise, which was made by the Irish filmmaker whose name I've forgotten.
Yeah.
I've only seen those once, and it was both when they came out, so it's a long time since I've seen the Fede Evil Dead. So it'll be interesting to revisit that one. Obviously, Evil Dead Rise is still pretty fresh because it only came out like last year or maybe
Yeah.
the year before. I think last
Yeah.
year. Um, but yeah, I watched those when they came out. So I've seen them, but I don't really remember much of Fede's one. So I'll need to. I'll be definitely. I'll be rewatching both of them. Um, but I'll be keeping a special eye on Fede's because I don't really remember much of it. I remember Raining Blood, but I don't remember anything else.
I've never seen any of them, so I'm excited to finally have an excuse to. It's not from lack of interest. It's just from, seeing 3 to 5 new movies a year. They didn't make it into the cut, but I'm excited to finally get a chance to do it. And then there's a new one coming out next year, I believe.
Oh, okay. I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
Need to need to check out that.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're gonna wrap things up. Obviously, we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. So this is a double episode month, just with it being spooky season. So we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Hopefully Zach will be back with us. Maybe have another guest on. We'll see what we can work out. But me and Chris will be back in 2 weeks' time for sure to talk about the Evil Dead and Evil Dead Rise.
Groovy.
I knew you'd say that.
Thank you for listening. To hear more shows from the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network, please select the link in the description.
Hello, my name is Kevin Tudor, and I'm one of the 3 hosts of Almost Major, a film podcast dissecting many major indie studios and the films they release. Every week, myself, Charlie Nash, and Bryden Doyle discuss overlooked, forgotten, or bona fide classic indie films via studio-specific miniseries. We've previously covered numerous films from Artisan Entertainment, Lionsgate Films, and New Line Cinema. Titles including The Blair Witch Project, American Psycho, Dogville, But I'm a Cheerleader, Saw, Requiem for a Dream, and Ringmaster, the Jerry Springer film. Anyways, we have a fun time every week and we hope you will join us. Subscribe to Almost Major wherever you get your podcasts. Now proudly a part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
If you're looking for more horror outside of the mainstream, look no further than Unsung Horrors, a podcast about underseen horror movies. I'm Lance.
And I'm Erica. Every other week, we'll cover a horror movie with fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. We'll even give you double feature recommendations to pair with the movies we discuss.
From gothic to shot on video, from slashers to comedies, from giallo to J-horror, we'll cover all the subgenres. So join us as we unearth these hidden gems of horror.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Unsung Horrors, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.